tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salailo Makwidi. We're just 2 minutes away from the top of the hour, 9 Central African time, and we're moving to our hashtag Africa Focus feature, where we focus on some of the most pressing issues in and around the continent of Africa. And in the headlines now is in Nigeria, where there's a growing insecurity that is threatening not just lives, but the land itself. In a recent study, there's been more than 50,000 farmers in 2024 that have reportedly abandoned the country's northeast as rampant kidnappings and violent attacks forced these farmers to flee their fields. It's not just about food anymore. There's about fear, it's about land, and it's about a future under siege. A farmers' advocacy group says large scale agriculture is now under existential threat in Nigeria, with the ripple effects already being felt in markets and communities across the region. As Nigeria battles multiple security crises, from Boko Haram insurgents to armed bandits and farmer header clashes that have taken the rounds. We asked the question this morning: is the state losing its grip on one of its most vital resources? What does this mean for food security, for rural stability, and for regional geopolitics in Nigeria? And joining us right now from Nigeria is Dr. Mukhtar, Imam, an international relations expert, to help us unpack the deeper political and security dimensions of this unfolding agricultural collapse. Doc, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Salam Media. Always a pleasure having you on air. Welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
You know, the pleasure's all ours. I'm looking at the numbers, and this was from a study. I think it was done in 2024, which states and claims that over 50,000 farms have been abandoned in Nigeria. That feels and looks like a staggering figure. From a security and maybe a policy perspective, how did we get here? How did we get to this point where food production essentially is being threatened in Nigeria?
Well, thank you very much. Like you have said in your reporting, that statistic is quite staggering. It is startling. However, that is the unfortunate reality on the ground. As a matter of fact, the reality is that statistic, the figure which you have just pointed to, is one of many studies that have been conducted in that respect. And I believe that what the figures you have just churned out is one of the most conservative figures, as a matter of fact. Well, in fairness to those who have conducted that survey, this is an unfolding catastrophe. I hope it doesn't become a calamity. The reality is that there are over 100,000 hectares of land that has been abandoned in northern Nigeria alone as a result of insecurity. Mind you, this is a region that is the highest producer in terms of agriculture. 6 out of these states in northern Nigeria are the highest producers of tomato in the whole of Africa. This is the irony. Beyond that, Benue State, which is basically in northern Nigeria as well, happens to be one of the highest producers of soybeans in the whole of Africa. All of this has gone to naught as a result of insecurity. So yes, this is the unfortunate reality. How did we get here? Remember what I just said. 6 states out of this over 14 northern states are the highest producers of tomato in the whole of Africa. Incidentally, even before the height or heightened insecurity across Nigeria, Nigeria was the highest importer of tin tomato. You see the paradox? That a country that is a producer of tomato was, before insecurity, the highest importer of tin tomato. So beyond security or beyond insecurity, which has ravaged the country and, of course, the continent, if not the entire world today, as a result of emerging threats within the security circle, the reality is that we have had decades of decay, and not just decay, but negligence on the part of policy developers, on the part of implementers of policies with respect to agriculture, and not just agriculture, but to a lot of other aspects as well. This is part of the crisis that we're grappling with, not just in Nigeria, but across the African continent. So yes, it is an unfortunate thing. It has created room for, or the condition for food insecurity. When you look at the figures, you'll find that Nigeria is grappling with about 30 or over 30% food inflation. Prices are skyrocketing on a daily basis, et cetera, et cetera. And it's quite unfortunate. And the irony is that we're seeing more of these, groups, violent non-state actors, insurgent groups, militant groups, kidnapping and banditry, quite on the rise. This is the paradox that the reality on the ground is that as much as security operatives and personnel and the government is doing the most it can, the situation is still not adequately under control.
Mm, mm, mm. You
Right.
mentioned you mentioned the northeast of Nigeria quite a lot, and there's been talk of ungoverned spaces in that part of Nigeria, the northeastern part of Nigeria. Is the state effectively ceding control of these agricultural zones to armed groups, essentially?
Um, yes and no. The question of ungoverned spaces, however intricate and controversial that concept has become. I wrote an article, I remember, on ungoverned spaces within the Sahel and the crisis of insecurity. And I got a whole lot of flags and a whole lot of debates around that conversation. It's a never-ending conversation. Etymologically, what is an ungoverned space? Conceptually, what is an ungoverned space, etc., etc. All of these technicalities begin to rear their head. But the reality is, when you look at the concept of ungoverned space from the prism of the absence of governance, governance meaning protection of citizens' rights and lives, providing adequate facilities for people to strive and thrive. When you talk about the absence of these basic elements and not just presence or rather delineation of boundaries and territory, which essentially is just the primacy or the primary, definition of what a governed space is, you will come to realize that this ungoverned spaces actually exist in northern Nigeria, considering that is where we're speaking of. In as much as the Nigerian government has absolute control over its territory, as far as its presence as a government is concerned, no part of the country has been ceded to any group or groups or individuals, as far as we know. But the threat of these groups, these violent groups, um, trying to undermine the presence of government, undermine government control and capability over these areas is quite glaring. The governor of one of the northeastern states, Professor Zulum, just a couple of weeks ago, kept re-emphasizing and doubling down on the fact that the state is currently witnessing an upsurge, a resurgence of Boko Haram and ISWAP within that territory, and that they are threatening lives and livelihood. And as a result of that, there is mass exodus of individuals. People are absconding, are running away for their dear life. And these are the realities not just in northeastern Nigeria, it is also a reality in northwestern Nigeria and even north central Nigeria. Of course, the peculiarities are there, they're not the same cases. In the northeast, we're dealing with outright terrorists, i.e., SWAP, Boko Haram, and so on. But now we're beginning to see the rise of other banditry groups, other kidnapping elements within the
Mm,
northwest. Lakurawa, for example, in Zamfara State, in places like Kaduna State, Niger State, north central Nigeria. All of these you find that part of one of the prevailing reality is most of these groups are angling places where there are rich mineral deposits. It's not just
mm,
about the agricultural land. Of course, there's wherever you find mineral, it is on land, and naturally, people either farm on them or explore minerals. So this is one trend that we have come to realize in recent times. I'm currently one of the directing staff with the National Institute for Security Studies in the country. We just conducted a state study tour. As a matter of fact, my group, my syndicate, was supposed to visit South Africa on the 16th. For some reasons,
mm,
it has been moved to Rwanda. So a part of what we're doing is to examine the impact of non-state actors in security management in Africa, its implications, and so forth. So these are some of the findings that we're beginning to get. You the feelers is most of these groups are angling the mineral resources, and it is not uncommon to see that there are external interferences, in as much as the internal contradictions are very clear. People within the states are sometimes conniving with these individuals to undermine the presence of government, undermine the efforts of government. Also, there are external factors as well. We've seen a lot of individuals from Blackwater, for example, a British army, I think, was caught just of recent, selling arms to some of these groups and individuals in the fringes or across the fringes of the country. So it is
Mm.
not to say that the government is losing grip, but the reality is that these groups are threatening and undermining the presence and capability of government and governance.
Mm, mm, mm. How are some of these dynamics affecting Nigeria's image and relations, maybe within ECOWAS and the broader West African region? And I'm asking this because there seems to be security concerns that are mounting across the Sahel region.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You see, in international relations, the one thing that is mostly prevalent, the one factor that drives foreign relations is, or rather, let me put it this way: foreign relations is often intertwined with domestic policies. No matter
Mm,
how you try to portray yourself within the international system, where your domestic arena or the issues within the domestic front have not been properly addressed, it has a way of undermining your position within the international system, no matter how you try to project yourself. Um,
mm,
Society is governed by its triangle: political dimension, economic dimension, and of course, social dimension. Until and unless you ensure that this triangle within the domestic terrain is addressed thoroughly, you have a hold or a grip on your micro and macroeconomic issues and indices are pointing to the fact that you actually do have a grip on them. You have a grip on your social psychological conditioning of either your people, the sense of patriotism, social safety nets are in place, etc., etc. Until and unless you ensure that your political image is not threatening, governance is not threatened, the political space is not overheated, we do not see
mm,
interferences, etc., your image within the international system will be questioned, will be called to question. Not more a time where Nigeria is the chair of ECOWAS. It doesn't really portray us well within the international community, because what gives you the bargaining chip to come to the table to have a conversation is your ability to showcase yourself as being able to, put a shock absorber to address some of these challenges we've talked about. Because you see, in international relations, there's the idea of diplomatic bargain, and you must bargain. And the reality is that you're bargaining from one of three positions. You're either bargaining from a position of strength, a position of weakness, or a no position at all. So for you
mm,
to come to the table and showcase your strengths, just like China has done, and that is what has earned it a position, a place around the table of the United Nations Security Council. It is not because they are plenty. Nah, it is because they have showcased their ability to, withstand shock. Their economy is doing fantastically well, and so these are some of the things. And what is happening within the Nigerian political space doesn't really speak well. And so we cannot come to ECOWAS to have a conversation, because the first question that will be asked is, what are you doing in your own house? How have you been able to address problems? You know,
mm,
there are a
mm,
lot of instances that will support or buttress the point that I've just made. ECHO, for example, was a policy that was created within ECOWAS to ensure that a single market, a single custom union, and so on and so forth is established for the 12 plus countries within the ECOWAS fold. No country has been able to, or rather, most of the countries have not been able to achieve some of the conditions that have been set for membership into ECHO. Nigeria is one of them. It undermines our position economically, security-wise. You come to speak at the multinational joint task force, for example, which has been established to address these issues of insecurity within the Lake Chad Basin, and you are grappling significantly with insecurity within your country, how then do you project yourself within the international system? Until and unless we come back home individually, try to address this problem within our territorial confines, within our enclaves, we cannot go to the international community and have any meaningful conversation. And as a matter of fact, I'll tell you this with a straight face. This is part
Mm,
of what is undermining Nigeria's position. And you see countries like Burkina Faso, etc., pulling out and forming ACE today, which shouldn't be the case. At a time where we need multilateralism, at a time where we should see countries coming together to have a common front, particularly countries, emerging economies, especially those within Africa, to be able to
mm,
project ourselves and tell the rest of the world that we have a grip on the situation, we are weakening governance and institutions at the same time. It doesn't augur well. It doesn't speak well for us if we want to have a position to be able to speak, not just at ECOWAS, not just as SADC, not just as ACE or whatever. Within the international system, we must come home and address this basic primary situation. We did not finish addressing MDG. All of a sudden, SDG came.
mm,
We have not been able to address SDG. Where do we go? How do we sit at the United Nations General Assembly and demand for a chair in the Security Council when we have not been able to articulate our problems and address them properly at home? This is the same thing
mm,
that trickles down to regional blocks, to sub-regional blocks, etc., etc. So, in as much as this is the reality on ground, I still do believe that Nigeria has the wherewithal, Nigeria has the capabilities, Nigeria has the resources. But mind you, one out of every four African is a Nigerian, and we should be able to harness this human and potential, and human and mineral potentials and resources to address this situation.
mm. And I think
It's not beyond
addressing it. Definitely. And I think addressing it starts, as you mentioned, on the grassroots level. That's where it leads my next question. You have many farmers speaking of ancestral land that has now been lost. From a governance or, peace building standpoint, how do you begin to reclaim and rebuild trust in some of these decimated communities, essentially?
Well, you see, building trust, getting people getting to address these issues would require a complete, first of all, an honest conversation.
Mm,
There's the need to ensure that the reality is we are all settlers. We just don't know when we got there or who we kicked out when we got there. So the question of an aborigine is very difficult to prove in whatever circumstance. However, when people have tilled the land, when people have lived in a land, when people have been in a particular place for a period of time and have invested so much in that place, whether it be through state instruments that they are being disposed of their land or alienated from that land, or it be through violent non-state actors such as militants and other groups, for example, as we're speaking of, um, when people cry foul and say, look, my ancestral land is being taken from me, we need this, we need to address this situation. The first way to address this thing in all peace building models or techniques that have existed over years, the first thing is to first of all sit, mediate through the process, ensure that an honest conversation is heard. The brokerage is sort of, brought into the mediation process. Ensure that some kind of compromises are made. Ensure that restoration is given. Ensure that people are protected. As Robert McNamara, and rightly so, development is security and security is development. Until and unless
mm,
these essential things are provided for people to be able to either return back to their land or giving land elsewhere, these issues will continue to surface and resurface. And this is what has led to the farmer herder clashes you consistently hear about or read about in Nigeria and across the continent. In places like Rwanda, for example, even though that has been drastically reduced, the reality is these issues will constantly be there because until the end of time, there will be contestation over land. And I am sure South Africa is no alien to this situation. So
true.
we need to sit as a government and as a people to have an honest conversation. The last time government tried to initiate a policy called Ruga. Essentially, it has to do with open grazing and ensuring that government intervenes where land has been provided and earmarked by government. And by the way, government has through Land Use Act has sole right over land across the country. Therefore,
Mm,
where government brings certain policies, and these policies have been long standing, and people begin to politicize it, people begin to throw in all sorts of trivialities. You begin to hear about religious coloration being given to it. You begin to hear about ethnic coloration being given to it. Hey, they're trying to bring in their Fulani brothers. Hey, they're taking over our land. Hey, we have been here for ages. This land belongs to us. When this sort of rhetorics begin to come into the conversation and a narrative is being created, you see, it doesn't really help the situation. And that's why our people need to come to this table of dialogue with an open mind. This
mm,
idea of open grazing is about advancement, is about development. It's a global practice. But when the former president, President Muhammadu Buhari, tried to initiate it, people begin to, to give it a religious ethnic coloration. Oh, he's Fulani. He's trying to take over our land and give to his kinsmen. It is not very healthy. Now look where
mm,
we still are. This conflict has not ended. Open grazing, you find people going into open grazing and herding their cattle around. It is not economically viable. So we must ensure we educate our people, have an open and honest conversation around these issues, constant and consistent awareness, because a lot of people are in the dark. Trust me. Part of the
mm,
reasons why we're faced with this challenge is that we have too many reading and writing illiterates working amidst us. It's because we have too many unrepentant ethnic warlords and religious chauvinists working amidst us. And until and unless we try to capture the few we can, educate them, sensitize them on the importance of these things, we will continue to have this problem of people claiming that their ancestral land has been taken from them. And this is exactly when you look at the broader context, the case of Palestine, for example, and the inhumane and whatever unfolding unfortunate reality that we're witnessing today.
mm, mm. I think we're going to leave on that note, Dr. Imam. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure getting insights from you when it comes to, some of the most pressing issues in Nigeria. And I hope we chat in the not so distant future. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me.
There you go. I think a really, really insightful conversation there about Nigeria and what's currently happening in that part of the world. Very, very concerning. I mean, that stat of over 50,000 farmers that have been abandoned, according to Dr. Mukhtar Imam, that those are the conservative numbers. There's even more. And when you look at the impact that is having on the ground, the issue of food insecurity that Nigeria is already suffering with, it's cause for concern. And I think very, very important to highlight that this morning on our hashtag Africa Focus feature. There's a feature where we look at the continent, look at Africa, and you can't look at the continent in Africa without looking at Nigeria. They are the biggest economy on the continent. They are a powerhouse when it comes to relations on the continent, particularly when you look at West Africa. And it's concerning. It's concerning more than anything, seeing these kinds of stats and these kinds of incidences happening. I mean, imagine if this was here in South Africa, the amount of noise and concern that would have. More than 50,000 farms have reportedly been abandoned in the country's northeast as rampant kidnappings and violent attacks force farmers to flee their fields. I think we can know that it's not just about food anymore. It's about fear. It's about land and a future under siege. It's going to be interesting to see how the government deals with this. But from what I'm gathering from Dr. Mukhtar Imam, it doesn't look like a good and great state of affairs. There seems to be a disconnect regarding the leadership of Nigeria, and it's a spillover, man. We've seen similar issues in parts of Mali, parts of Burkina Faso and Niger. It feels and looks like a regional trend, and one can only ask themselves, what does this mean for cross-border cooperation and the instability of the greater Sahel region? Going to take a quick break. News and views continues after this.